Welcome. I am Eleanora Ferrante. I am the owner of Square Peg Square Hole Coaching. I am a college and career coach. Today we're going to be talking about college and COVID and what you need to know, because a lot of things have changed due to COVID. It's been a really interesting year, to say the least. And I'm going to say everything's really been upended. So what was always an unpredictable process is now an unpredictable process with mass confusion thrown into the mix. Not great. So there's a lot that's been going on. This is a small, friendly group. If you have questions, by all means, feel free to throw them in the chat as we're going along, and I will answer them as we go. So there's no reason to hold on to them to the end. At the end, I will bring back up my contact information, but I'm going to post it for you now just in case so that you can also see it. And you'll have it in the chat. So we're going to start by talking about changes due to COVID. So what were the things that happened? And from there, we'll get into things that you can be doing, what was the impact on admissions, and so forth. So we get a full picture. So I'm going to start off with the thing that's on most people's mind right now, which is the standardized test. Right? So a lot of things changed this year due to the standardized test. Biggest thing, of course, is that they kept getting canceled left and right. So ACTs, SATs, and even sometimes you thought you had a test and then you would show up and there would be no test. That was awful for a lot of students. These days it's gotten better, but still, even on Long Island, it's been tough. All you need is a quarantine to go into effect at the school, and then they have to shut down everything that's going on there, including the things on the weekend. So, while it's nice that everybody's been starting to come back to school and a lot more districts are bringing more and more students back in, it does raise the chance that they're going to contact trace and a lot of kids are going to test positive and that they might have to quarantine. So it is something to keep in mind. It's not still as easy as it used to be to make sure you have the tests in place. But there's good news with that, because this year, a lot of schools went test optional. So what does that mean? Well, basically, at colleges or universities, as you know, you have to submit typically your ACT or SAT score, as well as your grades and everything else. But test optional means that you don't have to send your score. You can if you want, but it's no longer a requirement, which is really nice, because there are a lot of reasons why you might not want to send your score. I mean, the obvious being that it's not the number you want, but the reasons why that can occur were pretty wide range this year. Yes, a lot of people had their tests canceled. That was a major impact. A lot of kids could not prepare for the tests. So even if they did take the test, maybe their score was lower than they wanted it to be. Or if they got to take the test, they only took it once and they didn't have the chance to super score and make that number better. The number of schools who have gone test optional over the years has gradually grown. Years ago, everybody required the tests, and that number started to decrease slowly but surely. There's 4,000 public and private universities and colleges in the United States. And in 2019, a quarter of them, 1,000, were test optional. That's a pretty big number. In 2020, that number increased by 60%. It went up to more than 1,600 schools. That's a lot of schools. And it wasn't just the typical test optional schools. American's been test optional for years. They pride themselves on that. Dickinson as well, a lot of schools. But last year, the Ivies went test optional. MIT went test optional. Stanford, UCLA, all these really big names. Penn State, University of Maryland, Michigan. It was crazy. But who wanted to be the school that was requiring you to take the test? Nobody. Right? So you saw a lot of big name schools go test optional, but at the end of the day, there are still some times where you might want to send your score, even though it's optional. Right? So if you were able to take the test and you did really well, you should send it, right? It's a data point for that school. So if you've got a good score that you're really proud of, you would send it. How do you know it's a good score? The colleges will post, whether on their website or through the College Board's website, or through any one of the many, many guides that are out there, and they'll tell you what the mid-range is for their school. So if the mid-range is, say, 1,100 to 1,200, and you scored a 1,250, you want to send that score. If you scored an 1,150, you want to send that score. If you scored, say, 1,000, you're probably not going to want to send it, right? So if you were at the upper end of the mid-range or higher, you definitely want to send your score to that school. right? Some schools are still using that number as part of their calculations for determining merit aid. So even though it might not impact whether or not you get into the school, it might still impact whether or not you get aid. And that's simply because the schools are trying to figure out how to analyze everything. This is new to them, and they're trying to sort out all the pieces to it. They're all saying they're going holistic, but it's really causing a bit of a problem this year because they just don't understand completely how to manage it. So a whole bunch of schools went test optional. A number of schools went test flexible. So what is that? And that's a relatively new experience for us. Test flexible basically means you pick the scores that you want to send to the school. So if you took the ACT or the SAT and you did well and you want to send it, great. Maybe you didn't do so well on that, but maybe you were one of those few kids who got to take an SAT subject test and you did really well. Send that. Perhaps you took the AP exam in a couple of your classes and you got a really good score. You got a 4 or a 5. Well, you could send that. And if you're an IB school, and I know Whitman is not, but if you're an IB school like Northport is, well, and you did really well, you could send that score. So test flexible, you get to pick and choose. And a couple of schools, big names, are doing that. You have Brandeis, Bryn Mawr, Hamilton, even NYU. You get to pick it. Kind of nice. Then what's a relatively new phenomenon started happening a couple of years ago, and right now there are 69 schools that will do this. It's called test blind. Test blind is completely different. It means whether or not you choose to send the score doesn't matter. They're not going to look at it. It is out of the equation. So some of you might have heard the term need blind, in which case those schools are not looking at your financial situation to decide whether or not to admit you. Test blind is they're not going to look at your score. So this year, due to some legal reasons, the University of California and the Cal State schools went test blind, which is really great if the rest of your application is really strong. It's great if your test score wasn't so good to start off with, but I felt for some of those kids who had gone out and had been able to take the test and had done really, really well, and their score was not looked at all, right? So that really hurt for them. But the whole concept behind it is that you are not a number, and that's why we're not going to look at it, because a lot of schools are starting to say, well, you know, that test score is just a one date and time. And I tend to agree with that. It's just one piece of the puzzle. If you've had the opportunity, like a lot of the kids around here, to test prep, you're at a certain advantage over the kids who couldn't. So these schools are going test blind. And interesting, so some of these schools have done this for a few years now, Catholic University being one of them, Dickinson being another, like I said, the UCs and Cal States. WPI just announced this week, Worcester Polytech, that they've gone test blind. And my alma mater, Cornell, is saying that 3 of their 7 schools, Cal's, so the the agriculture school, their architecture and business, all 3 of them have gone test blind this year. Testing it out, see how that works, right? Understand, test optional is not the same as test blind. Test optional, you got a good score, you send it, they'll look at it. Test blind, doesn't matter, they're not gonna look at it, right? Now, historically, students who send their scores tended to be admitted more often than students who didn't. We'll have to see how this year plays out. Georgia Tech is one of the schools that has put out their numbers. They said that about 37% of the students who applied went test optional, and of their admitted students, 20% were test optional. So numbers don't exactly jive in that sense, but we have to wait and see what goes on with everybody and what the rest of the schools choose to do. So check back in with me come the summer when I have the rest of those numbers. All right, so we have SAT and ACTs. In addition to that, College Board also offers what is called the SAT subject test. So these are exams that would give you an opportunity to really showcase how well you could do in a specific subject, whether it be a language, math, STEM, history. This year, just last month, they announced that they are getting rid of the SAT subject tests. And so a lot of people go, what's a subject test? A lot of people never even took it to start off with. But the subject tests were another way of showcasing how well you knew that material. So a lot of engineering programs would look for STEM scores. If you were going into a world language program, they would look for those world language scores, right? So it was one more data point for them. Not a lot of people were taking them, and the itself was having enough trouble being administered. So College Board this year, remember, College Board is a business, decided to back itself out and say we're no longer going to be doing the SAT subject tests. Honestly, this is such a low impact to most people. It's really more for the higher end schools. So, and a lot of them were walking away from it anyway. So I think that's all in all, it's a better space, but I can guarantee you that the AP tests are going to become more important because guess who runs the AP tests? College Board, right? So I'm waiting to see how that will be impacted. You know, as you may know, for the APs this year, there are 3 different ways they're going to administer it 3 times. So the first one, administration 1, it's going to be in school. It's the traditional way of doing it. It will be a paper test. It will be offered over the course of 2 weeks, just like it normally is. Administration 2, it's going to have some in-school and at-home parts. About half of it will be paper and about half of it will be online. This will be run the middle to the end of May. And then administration 3 is also in school and at home, but it's pretty much all online with the exception being the world languages. We still haven't figured out how to do Chinese online apparently. So all the world languages will be online. All the world languages will be paper. In case you're wondering, if you're a Whitman parent, Mr. Blair has told me that they're doing administration 2, which means that there will be the opportunity to do some in person and some online. They're trying to find the way to do this best to reach as many students. So keep watch for that and see how that changes. So that's all the changes to the tests. What other changes are out there? The Common App has made a lot of changes this year. Some of which you may already have seen. So if you know anybody who applied this year, you would know that there is a COVID prompt this time around. So they added this in kind of late in the game. And basically it said, it's an open space. If you need it, the space is yours to describe the impact that had to you. Colleges care about the effects on your health, well-being, safety, family circumstances, and so forth. So they wanted to know if something was going on that made it hard for you to go to school, they wanted to know that. Maybe that impacted your grades, right? So for those kids who potentially didn't have access to technology, and so their grades suffered. For those where it was 5 kids in a house and they're all trying to study at the same time, maybe your parents are first responders, healthcare workers, essential workers, right? And so maybe you had to take care of your younger siblings. Maybe people got sick in your house. Maybe you got sick. So Common App gave a space to this cohort to be able to talk about those things that happened to me because of COVID. That prompt is going to stay with us through the next cycle because they know that there are a lot of current juniors who still are being impacted by COVID, and they want to give them the opportunity to talk about it. 250 word free space, right? Not to be used for the my camp got canceled kind of story. This is really for something significant. Now, if camp getting canceled and that was a camp for kids with disabilities, maybe you want to put that out there, right? But for the general population, you're looking for things that really had a huge negative impact on your life. Common App has also decided this year to provide a new essay prompt. They are getting rid of the old one that we talked about. Is there a problem that you would like to solve? Nobody really used it. So instead, they've changed to a new one, which I really like a lot. Reflect on something that someone has done for you that has made you happy or thankful in a surprising way. How has this gratitude affected or motivates you? Nice. Giving them a chance to step back and think about what's going on and what did somebody do for me this year that I'm really, really appreciative of. Right, so to give a good spin potentially to some really tough times that these kids have encountered over the last year or so. There are some other changes to the Common App that have gone on kind of in the background. Some of it is very simple. They're now giving opportunity if you're a veteran to be able to put that in, to give you more opportunities to describe yourself instead of just the male-female options, to talk a little bit more about who you are. They've taken out some of the disciplinary pieces that were in there. So I think they're all really good steps that the Common App has been taking to embrace a wide range of kids to talk about, give them an opportunity to talk about who they are and the diverse population that they are, and to really think about how things have impacted them, both in a negative and a positive way. So good changes to that. Lastly, one of the other big things that came about due to COVID was college campuses got shut down. Right, same as with high schools. Everybody went virtual this year. There are a few that chose not to, but very limited. The Merchant Marines and all the academies, they all stayed in person. But for the most part, most schools went virtual this year. So that meant you couldn't visit the schools. So I actually had a couple of students that are college freshmen that never visited their schools before they attended. Can you imagine? Some pretty brave kids, but they knew the place that they wanted to be, and all of the parameters for them were right, and off they went. Unfortunately, they've been doing great because they put a lot of time and effort into picking the right schools. But I now have a number of seniors who have applied to 8, 10, 12 schools, many of which they've never seen. So that's made it really difficult this year. First of all, it's difficult to figure out where to apply. And now that you're starting to get acceptances in, you still need to be able to go see the schools. A lot of kids just can't go off without seeing them. The nice change because of that is that there are much better virtual tours and information sessions. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would tell you, please don't look at any of those virtual tours. They are terrible what the colleges are putting out there. It was really rare to find a school who did a good job talking about themselves and posting all the pictures and giving you a real feel for being on campus. They've turned it around. And I have to tell you, a lot of these schools have done a phenomenal job making you feel like you're there, really getting to see the campus, getting to see some of the kids, seeing the inside of some of those buildings. Is it the same as being on campus? No, but it's really, it's a good stepping stone to be able to do that. What's nice now is a number of the schools are saying they are open for admitted students. So that's great. I have a number of seniors who are heading off to schools where they're saying, you're welcome to come. There's still a few that are out there saying, no, you can't come visit us. And that's unfortunate, but given what's going on, totally understandable. So if you are a junior or a senior and you want to see the campuses, check out those schools' websites and see if you're able to go there. If you are, make sure you follow protocol, that you do all the things that they ask you to do. If they are closed, don't go. Right? They really don't want you on there, and they're trying very hard to keep their kids, their staff, their faculty, everybody safe. So changes to the tests, changes to the Common App, changes to the college campus, and of course, changes to activities. Everything shut down, activities shut down. And that was really rough for a lot of students. No sports, no performing arts, no debate team, no yearbook, right? All of it taken away, right? You weren't able to do any of that. You couldn't do community service. You couldn't get out there and help others the way you might have. You couldn't work, right? Everything gone. Little by little, they've all been coming back, but clearly they had a major impact on our students this year. Partly mental health because you lost all your activities as well as your in-person ability to see others. But there are a lot of kids who just like to be busy and they like to do things. So that had a huge impact. The flip side to that is a lot of kids started rediscovering their love of music, their love of reading. They started writing again, right? Taking a step back, taking a breath. I have one senior, he built a gym in his house and he's gotten into nutrition and he's turned the corner in terms of his athletic abilities, just as he's gotten stronger and he's been better with what he's putting into his body. My niece has taken to reading again and blogging about it. How cool is that, right? But there are other kids who have been able to take a step outside and say, I want to do something to help others. Some have created clothing drives, school supply drives. I had somebody who collected things for expectant moms, right? So there's still plenty of opportunities. They just have to be done safely. So activities canceled, activities coming back, but there were still things that could be done. So what were the impact on admissions with all these changes? Well, the number one impact really was the number of applicants skyrocketed at the more selective schools. MIT, their early action numbers went up by 60%. So did Harvard. Right? University of Massachusetts, their numbers went up 20%. So, you know, all the Ivies went up. The UC schools, UCLA had well over 100,000 applications. Somebody told me today 140,000. Can you imagine 140,000 applications? NYU had over 100,000. The numbers are just staggering, to be honest. In conjunction with that, the number of applicants at community colleges decreased, as well as at some of the less selective schools. A lot of guesswork as to why that is, but when you think about the population at the community schools, a lot of times it's people who can't afford to go away or to go to some of the more expensive schools. So if there's been any change to their financial situation, they may not be able to even afford community college. A lot of people at community college are also older learners. Maybe they had to work, right? Somebody had to take care of the younger siblings. There are all sorts of reasons why, but those numbers have definitely come down. So what does that mean? Well, the more selective schools, it means it was even harder to get into this year than in previous years. Typically Harvard runs at about 5% acceptance rate, and this year it was lower than that. It's crazy, right? So 95, 96, 97 kids out of 100 were told no, as opposed to yes. That's mind-boggling, right? And there are lots of great students who were qualified to attend those schools, but they're just not getting in. Part of the problem with that is the reason why there were so many applicants was because it was test optional. Now, sometimes that's great because there are a lot of kids who just don't test well. And so having the option to go test optional was really helpful for them because maybe your grades are high. Maybe you have some really phenomenal activities. Maybe you've got a whole other side to you that's really, really looks great, but your test scores are down here and everything else is up here. Well, this is the year you could toss those test scores and just be looked at more holistically for who you really are, not that you had one bad score. The downside is, so you also had some students who just decided to throw their hat in the ring and they weren't really qualified for the schools. They just thought, well, why not? I don't have to send a test score. So there's nothing that's precluding me from applying. So they just decided to do that. My mind, those kids were pretty much just sending a donation to those schools, unfortunately. But the problem with that more so is that it made it harder for admissions to get through to find the really qualified applicants because they had so many to look at. So not saying that a test score makes you qualified. It's just one piece of the puzzle. A lot of kids who have great test scores might not have everything else, so they're still not qualified for those schools. But they just made it harder this year. One of the other impacts you're going to see is that because the kids with the lower test scores did not send them to those schools, the mid-ranges that the schools report are going to go up. It's because there's no lower numbers. Everything's just higher. University of Chicago a number of years ago decided to go test optional, and their test score medians went up, right? So we're going to see more of that. What's going to be interesting then is this becomes maybe an anomaly this year, maybe not, depends on how long we stay test optional at these schools. Some of you may have heard of something called the Fisk guide. It's like for the Princeton Review. It's a great book, a great resource. In order to be able to look at the schools and understand who they are, I'm going to type it into the chat so you can take a look at it. The Fisk guide has decided that they are not going to report this year's data in their books because they don't think it's really, two reasons. They don't think it's appropriate because it's an oddball year, but also because they are in agreement that maybe we should be moving away from test scores and looking more holistically at the kids. So if test scores are becoming less important because so many schools are test optional or perhaps test blind, what are colleges looking at? Well, pure and simple, they're looking at everything else. So now your grades become really important. Now your curriculum becomes really important. So did you take the most rigorous courses that were right for you at your school? Now, that doesn't mean taking AP Bio if you're not a science kid, but it could mean taking AP US History, right? If you're more of a history kid. So did you take what was rigorous and available to you? If your school doesn't offer APs and it doesn't offer IBs, no harm, no foul, right? There are plenty of private schools that don't offer AP classes, but are you taking what's rigorous? Your letters of recommendation become more important because that's insight into who you are provided by a teacher who really saw you grow and work hard in that class. Your activities become more important. Now, I just said a lot was canceled, but that doesn't mean there was no opportunity to do something. It just means that maybe it was different, right? So things that have become more important to kids this year might be family responsibilities. I have a number of students that this past year, they had to take a step back and they had to help out at home. I had one student apply, and on his activities list was that he was the family cook, because he was responsible for making sure that there was food on the table every night. You know, he had to learn how to go shopping and to cook healthy meals. Right? And he had people in his house, some were vegan, some were not. So he really had to learn and put that on his activity list. You know, it's looking for a bigger picture of who you are in your essays as well. Your essay gives you an opportunity to talk about things that you might not see in the rest of your application. So it's really it's an opportunity to see in a way that you can't through the rest of your application. I've had kids in the past write about some things that you might not expect. One wrote about learning to drive a stick shift because it showed his determination, how he really wanted to try and learn something that was a little bit different from everybody else. I had another student who was an art student who wrote about her love of art, and every paragraph just kept talking. I love art for this reason and this reason and this reason. This past cycle, I had somebody who wants to be a mechanical engineer, and she loves race cars. So she talked about going to some of these really big races, right? Giving admissions an insight into who you are in a slightly different way. Right? So all those things become more important than they would have in the past. So what should you be doing this year? Well, no matter what year you are in high school, whether you're a freshman or you're a sophomore or a junior, you want to focus on your academics. And I know that's not always easy, especially when you've been home. It can be really hard. I have one student, he really needs to be in class. He needs that interaction. So I understand that. But you need to focus on your academics to the best of your ability. You need to think about your activities and think more globally. Don't restrict yourself to the traditional things in school, right? All those different clubs that are available. What about things outside of school that you might be able to get involved with? There are lots of nonprofits that are looking for help. Go join one of the walks, do it virtually, right? Through whether it be Pancreatic Cancer, American Heart Association. There's a lot of places out there that need your help on the outside. All those animals that need to be rescued, somebody needs to foster them. All those things are great to do, and they happen outside. Think about ways that you can help others, even locally. Right? If you've got an elderly neighbor who can't figure out how to register for the vaccine, help them. If they still need help going shopping, if they need help with their yard, take the time to go and help them. Carefully, socially distanced, of course, right? But there's lots of ways that you can make a difference. Pursue a passion. So you love photography, never had a chance to go take pictures because it's so busy right all the time. Go do it. You want to learn, you want to learn to play tennis for the first time. Go do it. There are so many things online that are available to you, whether you take them through a program like MasterClass or edX. You can even take classes across the country this year, which is really kind of fun. There are a lot of summer programs that are going to be offered virtually. Everything from classical voice, I was just looking for that for a student today, through to poli-sci and economics, to a foreign language. And the nice thing is that traditionally you would have to go to those campuses to be able to take those classes. But right now, if you want to take a class at UCLA, you can do that from the comfort of your house, right? Boston College, NYU, Tulane. So there's so many more opportunities this year. And what you really want to do is look for leadership roles, a place where you've had a chance to stand out. There are lots of ways to be a leader. You don't have to be somebody loud in front of a crowd. You just have to take charge, move forward, gather people, and lead them forward. So I always think about my own two kids. They were both captain of their team, but they're both very different personalities. And any of you who know my kids could tell you that. My son is much more of a presence. My daughter's more quiet, but they were both really good captains of their team because they were able to guide the others and lead them forward. That's what we're looking for. Letters of recommendation, I also said, were really important. And it's hard this year if you're not in the same space as your teachers. So you really have to take the time to make those connections. If they have office hours, go to them. Make sure you're the one in class raising your hand, talking in the chat. Make sure your camera is on. All those simple little things so they can see that you're there and paying attention and really engaged. Those will help you, those little actions will help you get a better letter recommendation from all those guidance counselors and teachers. In terms of the tests, the ACT and the SAT, if you have the chance to take it safely, then you should, right? Just because they're test optional doesn't mean you shouldn't take them. That being said, there's a lot less stress that's being around the test this year, because if you can't take them or you don't do well, it's okay at pretty much all the schools that you're going to want to apply to. 1,600 to choose from, chances are you're going to find schools that you can apply to. Last year was a little rough. The Florida public schools still insisted on having test scores sent. There was a lot of backlash about that, so we'll be curious to see what they decide to do this year. But most of the schools that the kids around here apply to have gone test optional. So it's great. But don't put stress on yourself with them. It's really important. College visits. So at this point, if you're a junior, you definitely want to start taking advantage of the virtual tours, even sophomores, right? Just to get a feel for what's out there. Attend the virtual information sessions. When the colleges come on campus, and this past year it was virtual, you want to attend them. To tell you, I had a few of my students be the only ones in those sessions that Whitman was hosting. And it was great because they had an opportunity to really talk to the admissions officers and get known. Isn't that nice? Right? So when their application went across that person's desk, they're like, I remember that kid. And that's what you want. You want to make those connections. Right? You want to ask questions when you have the opportunity to connect, whether it's through those virtual sessions, whether it's through the virtual fairs. There are a lot of organizations that run virtual fairs, and they're on now. So again, if you have a chance to ask questions, you should do it. You might also want to visit some sample schools, I'll call them. We have great schools on Long Island, some of which are open, even locally, some of which are open. You should go check them out. Right? So if Marist is available to you, Stevens is available. If you happen to be down south, Tulane is available, right? Not suggesting you travel, but if you're down those different directions, go check them out and get a feel for the schools when you're in 10th grade, 11th grade, just to see what you like or don't like. Do you like the big campus? Do you like the smaller campus? Do you want to be in the city? Do you want to be in the suburbs? Do you care if you're in the middle of nowhere, right? Penn State's in the middle of nowhere, but it's a great school. So have a chance to go and start looking. And, campuses will be open more and more come the fall, hearing a lot more looking to do that. So fingers crossed this vaccine keeps us all safe and we're going to be able to get back on campus. So a few last things to think about when you apply. You want to research how the colleges are handling COVID. Some did a great job, some didn't. If you look at the numbers, you'll find a lot of students are saying that they're not really happy with their college experience. Hard to deny them that, because either they're home and doing it all virtually, or if they're on campus, they're still a lot of times in their rooms. I had one of my freshman clients, she actually moved off campus this past spring because she said when she was on campus, she was locked in her room with her roommate, basically. All her classes were asynchronous. And when they wanted to change a pace, they would switch beds so they could see something different. It's not what she was hoping for, right? I had another student that parents came up one time to take a trip around the campus and finally get to see it. And the parents like, what building is that? And he was like, I don't know. It turns out it was the business building. That's what his classes are in, but he's never there, right? So it wasn't really the experience people were hoping for. But some schools did a good job with it. So you want to do that research and really start to dive in and see how did they handle it, and are you comfortable with the way they managed it? Something else you want to think a lot about, especially if you are a junior this year, your college essay, right? It's going to be even more important going forward. It used to be that some schools wouldn't even read it. Penn State was notorious. They would tell you, oh, don't even read the essay. Can you imagine you put all that time and effort into it and just to be told that? But that's not the case any longer because, again, it's a way in to see a little bit more about who you are. So it's really important to think about the message that you want to convey. It should be something that you can't glean from the rest of your application. It can be something that explains more about who you are. It can talk about why you're really interested in that major, right? So for my student who wrote about race cars, well, she's really interested in mechanical engineering. She has taken her car apart. She's learning to do all that, right? It fits really nicely with mechanical engineering. When she came to me, her initial essay was about being a camp counselor, which was nice. It told, something about her and how she was empathetic and how she liked kids, but it wasn't really relevant to what she wanted to be and do. And as we got talking, we discovered that she had this love of race car. I'm like, oh my God, that makes so much more sense, right? And it talks about who she is. It talks about that she's willing to try something different. You don't hear a lot of females saying that they're really into race cars, right? So it just let her stand out in a way that really fit her personality well. So what's the message that you want to convey, right? And to make it really something that helps you jump into the essay and want to continue to read. Not everybody is a great writer, and that's okay. But the nice thing about this essay is it's not your traditional essay. It doesn't need an intro, a body, and a conclusion. It just needs to tell the story of who you are. And there are lots of ways to do that. So you can be creative and do that. Something else to think about when you apply, when you look at your activities, think broad, right? So this year, it's okay to talk about the fact that you learned how to knit. It's okay to say that you've done a lot of reading. It's okay to say that you've learned to cook. It's okay to say that you have all these family responsibilities. There are actually categories for these things now on the application. So it's great. It's giving you an opportunity to really think broader. Make sure you include your work. A lot of times I find students don't want to put that on there. They don't really think it's important. But think about this. If you go to school and you keep up your grades, and you're doing some activities, whatever they are, and you're working, whether it's 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours a week, that tells a lot about you. So you want to make sure those things get included. Your letters of recommendation are also really important. So you want to make sure the writer knows who you are. So that means pick the right people that know who you are, what you stand for, and what you do. Doesn't necessarily mean the class where you got the 100. You could have had a lower grade, but that teacher knows you really worked hard and you put the effort in. So they would be a good person to ask the question of, to write your letter. And provide them with the information they need. Not yet, but soon, my website will have a new page called, it's a resource page, and you'll see instructions for creating a brag sheet, right? And so it's basically telling the student what information they can give to their recommendation writers so that you can help ensure that you get a letter that really talks about who you are, because you want to make sure that they know what the major is that you're interested in, maybe a success that you've had, things that are interesting about you, activities that you're involved with, so they can tie them into their letter and make it more robust and really give the college admissions people something to chew on when they want to think about you as their applications come across. Right? And think about outside of school. Who else knows you? It doesn't have to just be your teachers and guidance counselor. If you're in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, if you're in a religious organization, if you volunteer someplace, if you work, those could all be great people to help you and write great letters for you. Right? So this year, it's more important than ever to think bigger picture in terms of your application. Make sure you're looking at your essay, giving it to somebody else to take a look at to make sure it really represents you and tells a good story. When you're looking at schools, to really understand how they've handled COVID, to think about what your chances are to get there and what you need to do to show that you're really interested and that you make sense for that school. Ask a lot of questions. Make sure you're jumping into as many ways of connecting with those colleges so they know that you're interested, and you can find out about them to make sure that they're the right fit for you. Because just in case you can't still go visit, you still want to know that it's a good space for you. Because at the end of the day, what you're looking for at a college is a school that's the best fit for you in terms of academics, social, emotional, and financial fit, right? All those aspects are really important because you want to go to a school that checks those boxes, because that's going to give you the best chance of being engaged. And the more engaged you are in college, the better your experience, the more you're going to get out of it, and the more value you will have from that school. College is expensive. There's no question, right? You can spend anywhere from $10,000 a year upwards of $75,000 a year, right? If you're spending $75,000 a year to go to college, that means that every month, because most schools go on a financial plan, every month you would be sending them $7,500. That's a crazy amount of money. You want to make sure that you're getting your return on your investment, right? Now, lots of ways to bring that cost down. There are lots of great schools that cost a lot less, but even if you're spending 10 grand a year to go to that school, you still want to make sure you're getting the best education possible for you and you're getting a good return on your investment, because it's 4 years of your life and you want to put it to good use. Okay, so that's all I have to offer you today in terms of COVID and the impact on college. I'm going to open it up. If you have any questions for me, feel free, please, to go into the chat. If you don't know how to get to the chat, either at the bottom or the top of your screen, depending on how you set it up, if you hover, you will see that there is a space for you to click on that says chat. And if you just want to type your questions in, be more than happy to answer your questions. I put in my information, but I'm going to put it again in case anybody might have missed it. Okay, question. For high school junior, when do you ask for recommendation letters? When do we get them, and how do we give them to colleges? Great question, Alex. Okay, so May is a great time to be asking for your letters of recommendation. Some teachers, if you don't ask for them at the beginning of June, won't do them, right? Because they spend their summers writing those letters. Other teachers are a little bit more flexible, and they're happy to, if you come in September and October and ask for them. But I always think you want to give yourself the best possible opportunity to get a good letter. So asking early is important. You do not physically get letters from teachers or the guidance counselors. They are input, especially for Whitman students, but basically any school on Long Island pretty much everybody uses Naviance these days. So your high school guidance counselor, we're going to input those letters directly into Naviance, and from there they get sent directly over to the colleges. If you were asking for an outside person, so if, for instance, you wanted to go to your Girl Scout, Boy Scout leader and ask them for a letter, the Common App and the Coalition App, which are the two most common applications available, have a special section where they can input them directly. So I know sometimes I write letters for students that I don't work with, and I can input them directly. And that's how they will go to the colleges. But great question, Alex. Does anybody else have other questions for me? Okay. Something to keep in mind with the Common App in terms of activities, I'll just throw this out there. Common App allows for up to 10 activities. Coalition App, which is it's getting used less and less, but is still used by a lot of the schools, Mid-Atlantic and South. So such as James Madison, JMU is still one of the holdouts that are only using the Common App, the Coalition App and their own. So a lot of us think you have to have enough activities to fill in the entire application. The truth is, across the country, it's usually 4 or 5 activities that most kids have, because what we're looking for is depth into something as opposed to breadth, right? You don't need to do 30 activities and really stretch yourself out. What you need to do is focus on those that mean the most to you and really dive in deep. Do you recommend writing the college essay about overcoming an adversity? Yes, no. Okay, so what does that mean? So there are 2 ways to write that essay. There are 2 prompts on the Common App that allow for it. The first one is, tell me about an obstacle that you have overcome, right? So specifically, I have the prompts in front of me. The lessons we take from obstacles can be fundamental to later success, right? How did a challenge, setback, or failure affect you, and what did you learn from it? So that's okay, but I'm going to ask you to think about the question in this way. Prompt number 5. Discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. It's kind of the flip side of that question, right? I happen to like that question a lot better. It speaks to who I am more. It's about the positive side to it. We all encounter obstacles in some way, shape, or form. But for me, it's really about what was the accomplishment, event, or realization from that moment that turned you into somebody else and brought you forward. So yes, you can write about it, but it really, a lot of it has to do with making sure you focus not so much on the adversity, but on what you learned from it and how you grew from it. That's what the schools want to know. So do all colleges have the same prompt? Again, yes, no. So the Common App is used by many, many schools. The coalition, it has 6 prompts that are very specific, and then a 7th prompt, which is basically, I have an essay that doesn't answer any of those other prompts, but I want to use it anyway. Right? The coalition app, their prompts are slightly different, but they also have a space that basically says, I have an essay that doesn't fit anywhere else. So most people tend to apply to schools that use those 2 applications. There are a few schools that insist on using their own. Georgetown is one of those schools. The California schools, if you want to apply to the UCs, University of California, not one of the 9, they have 8 prompts. You have to pick 4 out of those. They are similar questions. Townsend has their own. A few schools have their own application. The CUNYs have their own. So in general, any essay you write, you'll probably be able to use almost anywhere for your common essay. But there are just a few holdouts that are a little different. What other questions do you guys have? Right. So right now is a big time of year. If you know anybody who's a senior, while I was sitting here with you, I had 2 kids text me to tell me that they just got into some of their schools, so which has been pretty exciting, right? Yeah, and really great schools. So now's the time you'll start to see more kids are wearing a different t-shirt potentially. Come May 1st is the big day where everybody will have decided by then where they're going to school. For the most part, there'll be a few holdouts, they'll be figuring that out, right? So highly recommend that as you see kids wear those t-shirts and those sweatshirts on May 1st, ask them why. Find out what they loved about those schools. What was it that was interesting to them, and pull them in just to get a good feel for some place that you might not have thought of, especially the schools that you've never heard of. Right? So you might see, based on the text message I just got, that somebody got into Mount Holyoke and that's where they're going. You might go, where the heck is Mount Holyoke? Right? And go ask them, find out a little bit about it. Build your range of schools. Don't just sit with the 10 or 12 that everybody goes to. There are so many schools out there that can really fit you. Be a little different. Check them all out. Find a school that's might give you something different. All right, one more question. How do you send colleges achievements and certificates? Do they care about honor societies? Do they like community service awards? Yes, yes, yes. Right? So they want to know that you stand out in some way, shape, or form. In the Common App and in every application, there is a space for honors. So I always put them in there. If you have a specific achievement, so say you play tennis and you're a student athlete, you can always put it in with your description that you were a student athlete, or if you made counties, you could put it there. If you are a performer, and let's say you play the violin and you went to NISMA level 6 states, you can put that in there. Many applications also have just this blank space. Common App has a spot called additional information. It's blank. You can use it however you want, 600 free form words. If I work with a student who has a lot of performing arts or visual art accolades, or I worked with a student this year who had a ton of, she knows Latin like nobody's business. I've never seen anything like it. She can speak Latin. Okay, I took conversational Latin in college. I do not recommend that for most people. Not a great space, right? But those accolades we put into the additional information. So yeah, the schools definitely want to see them, right? Because that's what's going to make you stand out. All right. So you all have my contact information. Ms. Liz knows how to find me as well. Right? So if you have any other questions, by all means, feel free. That phone number is my cell phone. Feel free to send me a text. You've got my email. I'll also put my website in. So you can see I have a lot of stories. I write blogs. So over the last couple of years, you can see what's been important, what's going on by reading my blogs. There are some resources that are there already, and soon my page will be updated with a whole bunch of resources that free for you to use. How to think about colleges, brag sheets, questions that you should be asking when you go on a college visit. If you can't decide on a school, how do you pick it? All sorts of different resources, free. By all means, take them, run with them, have a good time. Right? But if you need to, just reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer questions and see how I can help. So I thank you all for attending. I thank the South Huntington Public Library for inviting me. I always love having the opportunity to come do this. And thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you have any questions, like she said, her contact info is in the chat, or feel free to call the library and we will forward anything along that you got. And have a great evening. Enjoy the nice weather.
Thank you.